What if pleasure is not indulgence, but sacred medicine? Hi, I'm Safrianna Lughna, the Queer Spirit Guide, and today I would love to share with you all about Beltane because Beltane is almost here, and it is the one holiday I feel like our collective has the most to learn from. So just in case you're new here, like I said, I'm Safrianna Lughna. I'm the Queer Spirit Guide. I am a trauma therapist turned transformational mentor. I'm a druidic priestess, and these things have more in common than you might think. So, what is Beltane actually? May 1st is a cross-quarter holiday that falls between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. It is the transition point between spring and summer, a moment when we are in lush, full bloom. It is the juicy joy holiday, the full, lush life that we have to experience. It's a festival, a cross-quarter day fire festival, and so it's really a great time to tune into our sacral fires, our fuel from within, the spark of life, and to really dance and be in the flow of the sun, the emergence of light. It is a fertility festival more than anything, a much bigger fertility festival than perhaps people realize. It has to do not just with human fertility, as the ancients would go up on the hills and frolic and fornicate and bring more babies into the land. It is far more than that. This is a day of the fertility of the land. Like I said, that lush bloom of life between spring and summer. If you go outside and you look around, you see things really in their full bloom at this time of year. The early spring and late spring flowers, just gorgeous blooms. This is also a time for creative projects. This is a time to really be in relationship with our sacred creativity. And that means creativity within our body, within our expression, within our relationships, and the expression of desire itself, very much indicated in this holiday. Again, this is not some Hallmark holiday. This is really a reclamation of what it means to be human and to be divine. It is a holiday of sacred union between the masculine and feminine principles within us. Or you can call it the doing and the being, the light and the shadow, the structure versus the flow, right? So I have been, like I said, practicing the Wheel of the Year holidays now for almost 20 years, and Beltane is one of the very first that I remember. I will never forget my first maypole experience, which, if you're unfamiliar, the maypole is probably one of the most common May Day or Beltane traditions that we still see today, which is erecting a big old pole and tying ribbons around it, and people hold the ribbons and weave around the maypole blessings and all kinds of things. And I had the pleasure of participating in a maypole one year where we were blessing people with fertility for their creative projects, for getting pregnant and having children, for marriages, right? All of these things kind of swell to the surface at this time of year for us to really look at the pleasure, the joy, the play, the fertility of who we are and who we came here to be. So let's talk about pleasure as sacred. This is the reframe I want you to walk away with. Unfortunately, our culture has a very complicated relationship with pleasure. Let's just call it what it is. Pleasure seems to be something that is unfortunately gatekept for certain types of people and out of reach for other types of people. And this is where I want us to all reclaim it. This is sacred activism work. Pleasure gets sort of collapsed or condensed into simply sex, food, and buying things in our culture. And that is so narrow. That is such a narrow definition of what pleasure can really be. So what does pleasure actually feel like in your body? No matter what you've been told that it should be or how it should look, what feels good in your body? That's the invitation that is here. You know, pleasure helps us restore our nervous system to a more baseline state. This is sort of the clinical piece of pleasure, if you will. When we experience more joy and ease and delight, our parasympathetic is able to come in. We're able to get into a calmer state in our nervous system. The body needs that parasympathetic state in order to heal. When we are in the sympathetic nervous system, when we are activated, it's very hard for us to actually integrate, for our bodies to restore, for us to really be anchored in ourselves and present. So we want more joy and ease and pleasure and play to help us be really present with the life that's here in front of us. And I feel like Beltane is such a holiday of that. Speaking of which, if you want to celebrate Beltane, I do have an upcoming 90-minute ritual for Beltane on May 1st with my dear friend Dr. Melissa Bird. Peek the details. So again, pleasure and joy is sacred activism at this point in time when we live in such a capitalistic culture that wants us to be constantly producing. And in a way, Beltane is a productive holiday. It's very much about the joining of the masculine and the feminine, the body and the spirit, the doing and the being. And so pleasure is how we remember that our body is safe in order to move forward and keep doing what we're doing. I have seen so many people begin to reclaim their pleasure and their joy and have so much more capacity in their lives to show up and do what's theirs to do, to be really present with what is in front of them, making incredible strides in their life, in their relationships, in their boundaries, in their careers, simply because they're enjoying themselves more. And who doesn't want that? So let's talk about pleasure magic. Now, pleasure magic is not all tantra and rose petals. It's something anyone can access. This is a sensory spectrum. This is a creative endeavor, relational, spiritual, erotic, sure. But it is so much more multidimensional, again, than just sex and food and buying stuff. So this spectrum of pleasure, again, I invite you, what does pleasure look like for you? What does it feel like when you are embodied in just the flow, the juicy flow of your life? That is the pleasure magic. So we have sensory pleasures. Go out and smell the flowers. I know it's a very cliche, stop and smell the roses saying, but it's so true. We get so much joy and pleasure and ease out of slowing down enough to see and smell and taste what's in front of us. Feeling cool water on your skin on a hot day. Out there gardening in the really high heat, spraying the hose and feeling the water rain down on me in a mist. That's pleasure. Having your bare feet on the earth, tasting something delicious. Like, these are things that we often have access to that we might take for granted. But sensory pleasure anchors us into our body, allows us to really be in our embodiment and move forward. Our creative pleasure, the process of making, of building, of expressing ourselves. I find so much pleasure in sitting down to write my novels. It is one of the best feelings in the world for me when there's nothing I have to do other than sit and connect with the story, sip my coffee, and do my thing, right? How do you create? How do you express yourself that feels so good? Is it singing? Is it dancing? Is it creating art? There's no one right way. But what is pleasurable to you? Our relational pleasures, being witnessed, being really deeply seen, having real connection with other people and laughing. This is pleasure. This is play. Our spiritual pleasure. Sometimes prayer, prayer can feel like love. It can be a really deep experience within ourselves, and that can be so pleasurable. As a priestess of Brigid, I have a practice that I've recently adopted where for the first 19 days of the month, I light a candle and I connect very deliberately with Brigid. And I find such pleasure in sitting down in the evening and lighting that candle and seeing its glow and feeling the presence of the divine around me. So what does it look like for you to be spiritually expressed? Ritual that moves you, practices that really light you up. Some people absolutely love the pleasure of drawing a daily card. Some like the pleasure of drawing more than one daily card. There's no right or wrong answer. And of course, I mentioned the erotic. Yes, this end of the spectrum exists. It is sacred too. Oh my gosh, do some sex magic, do some tantric play, breathe and look into the eyes of your lover, right? Beautiful, beautiful pleasure magic and so sacred. But I leave that last because it's certainly not the most important one in our human expression, but it sure can be fun. But magic really ultimately is made from directed energy and your intention. Pleasure is a form of energy that you can work with. So keep that in mind as you move forward, that you can play with your own magic, your own energy anytime. And you do not have to pick just one form of pleasure. Beltane really is here to remind us that every bit counts. All of it counts. So now let's talk about the shadow angle. This is where it gets really interesting for me as a therapist, as a priestess. You know, this is not just a time to celebrate pleasure. It is a time to reclaim what has been hidden, what has been buried because of societal narratives, because of gender stuff, because of the world feeling on fire, right? This is really about us reclaiming those pleasures that have been buried, that have been worn down, that maybe we've become jaded to. We get to reclaim them. So my question is, what have you been taught to hide about your own experience of pleasure? What have you been taught to hide about your desire? What have you been taught to hide about what you want in life? Shadow work is really about weaving new relationships with those hidden or buried parts of ourselves, bringing them to the surface to nourish them, not dragging them into the light, kicking and screaming and staring at them and going, why are you not doing what I want you to do? Why are you not experiencing this pleasure? But doing some deep reclamatory, some deep reclamation work of our parts that have gone into hiding because their needs were not met. And I think that the way that we've viewed Beltane in the past perhaps has really been about coming together with others and sacred reciprocity. And that is certainly something that we want to continue to build upon. Sacred reciprocity, mutual nourishment, co-creation, not depletion, not extraction, but genuinely co-creation. But there's also an aspect of reclaiming our pleasure, our needs, our desires for ourselves and meeting them that I think is a really bigger part of the shadow work we can do at this time of year. Ultimately, many of us learned that our pleasure, our desire is too much, wrong, dangerous, bad, etc. And that shame often becomes a block, a wall that is up, that unfortunately ends up driving compulsion often, rather than something really integrated and nourishing. Us being able to follow, what is really authentically pleasurable for us instead of what others have told us or told us we shouldn't be into. What I want you to remember is that what you have been taught to hide about your desires could actually be your power. It could actually be the underlying foundational thing that when you really embrace changes the whole game for you. So let's talk about the practical Beltane expressions. I'm going to give you some actual ideas of how to celebrate Beltane. And as I mentioned, I do have a ritual coming up, super simple, super fun with me and my friend, Dr. Melissa Bird. We just gather in community. All you need is a pen and notebook, and we connect deeply with these seasonal energies. But here's some ideas for how to practice on your own. So, keeping it light and simple, go forth and gather some flowers, right? With permission from the flowers, ideally. And ideally, what's blooming near you, what is abundant, what you are taking just enough for you to really enjoy. But some people don't like to cut flowers, so that's okay too. You could go out and enjoy the flowers, enjoy the blooming, take some photographs, right? You could anoint your threshold or your door with some form of blessing at this time of year. You can cook something with local ingredients and eat it slowly and really feel the nourishment, be in the experience of pleasure of eating it. You can light a candle and sit with your desires for a few minutes and see you really supercharging those desires. No agenda, just being in the moment. If you want a more embodied experience, of course, like I said earlier, go out and get your feet on the earth. Really stand and feel that connection, that embodied connection to the planet herself. Do some body work, massage, self-massage, movement that feels good, not something that's productive, but something that really nourishes your whole being and drops you into that sensory experience. Sing. Write a song, sing a song, hum, use your voice as pleasure You don't have to perform for anyone, right? And of course you can do a ritual. It's a great time for a fire ritual. Like I said, you could light a candle, but you could also create a bonfire outside. You could write down what you're calling in, what you're manifesting, what you want to call in more pleasure in your life, and you could burn it. You, of course, can do some gardening and do a ritual garden. Tend your garden as devotion at this time of year. And last but not least, cleanse your space, right? Cleanse with smoke or sound or even intention. These are all super simple things that you can do. My whole thing is that magic does not have to be expensive. It can be done literally with you, yourself, and your connection to what is around you. You don't need things. You need your body, you need your spirit, you need your presence, and to be here now. But what's your sacred Beltane practice going to be this year? Do you have any other ideas? And what are you most drawn to? Remember, this season, this transition into Beltane, this liminal space between spring and summer is not a to-do list. It is not a push to be more productive, though certainly this is the time of year when we feel that swell of growth energy, like we're ready to face things again. But what is a pleasure you've been postponing? What is something that would mean a lot if you let yourself have it? Can you give that to yourself this Beltane? Can you celebrate pleasure and joy and play and ease? I'll leave you with a journal prompt, which is, what have I been taught to hide about my pleasure and desire? And what if that actually gives me power? So what have you been taught to hide about your pleasure and your desire? And how can you reclaim that? That is the invitation this year. Remember, my friends, pleasure is not something we should be dismissing. It's not something to be ashamed of. It is so sacred, and it's the doorway in to really being embodied in ourselves here now. So I'd love to hear from you. What is one pleasure you want to reclaim this Beltane? What is something you're calling in this season? I'd really love to know. And if you're not already subscribed, please feel free to like and subscribe so that you can continue to hang out with me here and talk about the Wheel of the Year, trauma healing, and so much more. Like I said, I'm Safrianna Lughna. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. And if you'd love to join me in ritual, I just want you to know that I have a lovely heartbeat community called the Rebel Elements, which is free for anyone. And when you sign up for the seasonal shenanigans cohort, where we do our Wheel of the Year rituals, you get a super behind the scenes private community where you can gather with all of the other people who are in the cohort for the year. There's still time to sign up for this cohort. We have 6 more rituals this year. I'd love to have you there. So until next time, my friends, take care of yourself, be in more ease and joy and play. I believe this is the power that we need to really see things through to the next level of humanity. So, blessed Beltane, my friends. Until next time, bye for now.